PlayStation, the platform that gave us Metal Gear Solid, The Last of Us, and God of War. Prestige cinematic gaming icons also quietly became the platform of choice for the truly cultured. For decades, PlayStation was the home for fanservice games. Not because Sony had some master plan, almost by accident. And then, after amassing a huge, dedicated, and passionate fanbase, PlayStation started pushing those games away. Today, we're diving deep into the history of fanservice across every single PlayStation console, from the PS1 through the PS5, and even the weird ones in between. Whether you love it, hate it, or didn't even know it existed, the story of fanservice on PlayStation is actually one of the best lenses to understand the entire console's evolution. For decades, PlayStation was the biggest home for fanservice games. Then the platform transformed into something almost unrecognizable. And like a frog in a pot of slowly boiling water, that transformation didn't happen overnight. It took time. And when it became clear what was happening, it was already too late. This is the rise and fall of fanservice on PlayStation. Before we get to our first jiggle, we have to talk about how the PlayStation even came to be, because its entire existence is pretty much an accident too. You see, in the late 1980s, Sony and Nintendo were actually partners. Sony was building a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo, a PlayStation, if you will. Seriously. Then, in 1991, Nintendo cut a rival deal with Philips behind Sony's back, completely blindsiding them. Understandably, Sony was pissed, so they decided to compete directly with Nintendo by launching their own console. The Sony PlayStation hit store shelves in Japan in 1994, in North America less than a year later. So, right from day one, PlayStation's entire identity was
kiss my ass, sugar.
And that same energy is exactly what let a wave of insane games walk right through the front door. They definitely weren't chasing that same family-friendly image as Nintendo. Now, in those early days, not Sony, not developers, not rating boards, no one actually figured out the rules for 3D games yet. Polygons were new, character models looked like uncanny Lego people, and at the same time, a handful of games slipped in that quietly rewrote what fanservice even meant on a home console. One of the earliest pioneers was Tomb Raider. Lara Croft was pitched as an Indiana Jones-style adventurer, but almost immediately, the industry, media, and gamers saw her very differently.
Hey, time to load up on PlayStation games. Greatest hits are on sale. Crash Bandicoot, Jet Moto.
But I don't even have a PlayStation.
You do now.
Mom know about this?
Magazine covers, tabloid stories, and even rumors of nude modes further fueled the pandemonium. Lara Croft became gaming's first mainstream digital pinup, and Sony didn't blink, making Tomb Raider one of the PS1's flagship franchises. Blocky proportions and all. Then you have Dead or Alive, starting life as an arcade fighter competing with the likes of Virtua Fighter and Tekken. But director Tomonobu Itagaki built the game around something genuinely new. A soft-body physics engine created specifically for jiggle and bounce.
Get ready, one!
It was a technical showcase and the marketing hook. Dead or Alive not only became a legitimate fighting franchise on Sony hardware, but expanded way beyond that over the years. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Now, a game like Fear Effect broke all sorts of new ground, from its cel-shaded visuals to its adult situations, and even the relationship between the two female leads. It was strange, stylish, and proof that there was a big appetite for more mature and fanservice-heavy content. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. By the end of the PS1's life, the pattern was undeniable. Mature themes, cheeky polygons, and stylized fanservice weren't a niche embarrassment. They were baked into some of the platform's biggest and most acclaimed games. And this was only the beginning. If the PS1 was the experiment, the PS2 was the explosion. When the PS2 launched in 2000, budgets went up, marketing got edgier, and Japanese publishers suddenly had a mainstream audience to sell to. If you were a gamer in the early 2000s, you had a PS2. Hell, with its built-in DVD player, even non-gamers had one. This was the perfect environment for creativity and fanservice to thrive. And Sony, sitting on top of the best-selling console of all time, was letting almost everything through the door. Fighting games absolutely boomed, experimenting with an already proven formula. Dead or Alive 2 picked up right where the PS1 game left off, with faster combat, gorgeous interactive stages you could literally fight your way through and off of, and Team Ninja doubled down on the physics engine that made the original so eye-catching. Then Namco's own weapon-based fighting series went all in on the attractive characters, rocking maximum physics in Soul Calibur 2.
It's time to die.
Feeling like the other side of the bouncy coin from DOA. Soul Calibur 3 followed in 2005, a PS2 exclusive this time, going even further with character creation tools that let players build and dress their own fighters. It wasn't just a sequel, it was a statement, and its home was PlayStation.
Roses, on your marks, fight!
And then there's Rumble Roses, an all-female wrestling game developed by Yuke's for Konami, where literally every character had a face and a heel persona, and, I promise I'm not making this up, a humiliation meter that filled up during a match and unlocked embarrassing finishing moves.
I got you! Angel die! Did you see that? Dear sister, you truly are strong!
Winner!
Then the action genre is where things got completely unhinged. The Oni-chanbara series from Tamsoft and D3 Publisher are budget-priced hack-and-slashers where sisters Aya and Saki fight through zombie hordes in bikinis and cowboy hats while wielding katanas and getting covered in buckets of blood.
What?
They were cheap, gory, and proud of being exactly what they looked like, becoming a long-running franchise and one of my personal favorites because it never once apologized for what it is.
Water!
God Hand from Clover Studio, the same team behind Okami, directed by Shinji Mikami, leaned into camp and self-aware comedy, with just enough fanservice sprinkled on top for maximum insanity.
We meet again. I've been looking for you.
I don't recall sending you an invitation. Admit it. You missed me, didn't you? I just need a real man who knows how to pleasure a woman.
It was all about spectacle and completely in on its own joke. But it was also so far out there that the reviewers didn't know what to do with it.
Boring.
I'm still salty about this one.
You are so amazing.
And here's one most people forgot about, Primal. This wasn't some scrappy niche publisher, this was made in-house by Sony Computer Entertainment Europe. The protagonist Jen could transform using demonic power alongside her gargoyle companion Scree. It's a first-party, Sony-published dark fantasy game with a fanservice-heavy character design, in proof that at this point, Sony wasn't just tolerating this content from outside studios. Sony's own studios were making it too. But the game that best foreshadows literally everything coming later is Ikitoujin Shining Dragon, a fighting game based on the ecchi anime and manga series. In Japan, it got a Zero C rating, which is basically a teen rating. Then a US publisher, Valcon Games, fully localized it, submitted it to the ESRB for approval, and they kicked it back with a mature rating over what was officially cited as exaggerated breast jiggle. Yeah, Valcon considered censoring it to bring the rating down, but ultimately decided against it and canceled the US release entirely. Hold on to that story, because this is going to start sounding very familiar later on. Finally, let's talk about RPGs, because Japan's most prestigious, story-heavy genre was of course going to be part of the Gold Rush. Xenosaga, starting in 2002, is a dense philosophy and sci-fi obsessed RPG saga, and its breakout character wasn't a human at all. It was a combat android who instantly became one of the most recognizable fanservice designs of the generation, appearing on magazine covers and merchandise far beyond the game's actual audience. The Artanelico series from Gust started on the PS2 as well. These are RPGs built around song magic, and a mechanic where the characters' outfits get a whole lot skimpier as their emotional bond with the player deepens. It's a weird choice to be sure, but also the kind of thing that could have only thrived in this specific anything goes era. And the Atelier series, also from Gust, was quietly building its own dedicated audience on the PS2, with its unique crafting-focused gameplay with unmistakably anime-styled character designs that would go on to become one of the most enduring niche franchises PlayStation has ever hosted. And there are tons more, too many to mention. So, by the end of the PS2 era, fanservice wasn't a fringe curiosity anymore. It unashamedly permeated every genre, creating a dedicated audience that had an endless stream of new experiences to consume, all thriving in the open on the best-selling console in history. And soon, gamers could take their obsession with them wherever they went, because Sony was about to make culture a lot more portable. In 2004, Sony launched the PSP, and on paper, it was a multimedia powerhouse, built to compete with the Game Boy Advance and eventually the Nintendo DS. But no one predicted what would happen next. A huge chunk of PSP's niche library never got an English release at all. If you wanted these games, you weren't stumbling onto them at a big box store next to Madden. You were importing them. You were learning just enough Japanese to navigate a menu. This is the era where finding an obscure Japanese game stopped happening by accident and became its own hobby.
Are we ready?
I'll show you how it's done.
Remember how I told you Dead or Alive expanded way beyond fighting games? Well, in 2006, Team Ninja's beachy spin-off Dead or Alive Extreme 2 launched on Xbox 360. For years, the single most famous fanservice spin-off wasn't available on Sony hardware at all. Then, in 2010, Dead or Alive Paradise finally brought that formula back as a PSP port of Extreme 2. And the ESRB's original content description for this game is one of my favorite pieces of gaming trivia, period. It described the game using phrases like creepy voyeurism, before walking it back and issuing an actual apology for not being impartial enough. Seriously.
Eat this, eh?
Next, Akiba's Trip, developed by Acquire exclusively in Japan at first. This is just as notorious for its setting as it is for its gameplay. It's set in Akihabara, Tokyo's real-world otaku shopping district, and the entire combat hook is pretty damn inventive. You defeat vampiric enemies by exposing them to sunlight, which means literally stripping their clothes off mid-fight. Of course, it's silly and a little unhinged, but also a love letter to otaku culture. Then there's Criminal Girls, a dungeon-crawling RPG released in Japan only, where you lead a group of delinquent girls through hell and have to motivate them into fighting. When this game eventually got a VITA port and a Western localization years later, the localized version was noticeably censored. Unfortunately, we're going to start hearing a whole lot more stories like that. Two Heart 2 Dungeon Travelers. This one's a spin-off of a visual novel, Two Heart 2, reimagined as a dungeon-crawling RPG. It's a perfect example of what this era did best, taking a niche visual novel fandom and translating it into an entirely different genre, for people who wanted more time with those characters. Its sequel, Dungeon Travelers 2 in 2013, expanded the formula even further. And when it eventually got localized for Vita and PSTV in the West, Atlus censored 4 specific images to secure a mature rating. And finally, Conception, Please Give Birth to My Child, yes, that's the actual title, is a very Japanese game where a high schooler is pulled into a magical world, where he has to partner with 12 star maidens to produce star children, of course, who fight monsters in dungeons. It's without a doubt one of the strangest, most gimmick-forward RPG premises of the era, and it got popular enough in Japan to spawn a sequel that did get localized, an anime adaptation, and a PS4 remaster years later. On PS1 and PS2, fanservice was something that showed up on shelves you were already browsing. On PSP, it became something you had to actively seek out, import, and build entire communities and fan translation projects around. The audience wasn't just discovering this content anymore, they were actively hunting for it. Next is when the culture collided with prestige and cinematic ambition, with the launch of Sony's next big console. The PS3 ushered in the HD generation. Sony was chasing something bigger now: cinematic presentation, global blockbusters, franchises like Uncharted and God of War that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Hollywood. Marketing got slicker, budgets ballooned, and the platform's identity started to look a lot more like a prestige entertainment brand than the anything goes toy box it used to be. But the fanservice didn't disappear. It just stopped being the loud central personality of the platform and became one voice in a much bigger, much more image-conscious room. Take Lollipop Chainsaw from Grasshopper Manufacture, directed by Suda51, published by Warner Brothers, with a script co-written by James Gunn. Yes, that James Gunn, years before Guardians of the Galaxy. This is something the PS2 era never really needed to do. It wraps fanservice, cartoonish gore, and genuine humor inside a big, glossy, Western co-developed production. It's not hiding what it is, but it's dressed up for a much bigger stage than Rumble Roses ever was. Then there's Catherine from Atlus, a game about infidelity, commitment anxiety, and surreal nightmare puzzle climbing wrapped in strikingly mature themes, and a stylish, moody presentation. Catherine chose a niche Japanese publisher succeeding on PS3, not by leaning into overt fanservice, but by leaning into a different kind of maturity. Relationship tension and adult anxiety played completely straight. legacy franchises kept going too. Dead or Alive 5 and its expanded re-release Dead or Alive 5 Ultimate brought Team Ninja's fighter fully into the HD era. It was sharper, more detailed, but still unmistakably DOA. The franchise that helped start this whole story back on the PS1 was still standing 16 years later, without missing a beat. And on the RPG side, Hyperdimension Neptunia from Compile Heart and Idea Factory launched a franchise that's become almost the mascot of self-aware anime fanservice. The premise is a satire in itself. The main characters are literal personifications of game consoles, taking constant, winking jabs at the console wars, at their own industry, and their own fanbase. Neptunia is proof that by this point, niche anime RPGs weren't just embracing fanservice. They were making jokes about the fact that they were fanservice. If you want the single clearest sign that the culture around PlayStation was shifting, look at Dragon's Crown from Vanillaware. This is a genuinely gorgeous, hand-drawn side-scrolling action RPG, and months before release, its sorceress character became a full-blown media controversy. Kotaku published a piece mocking the character's design as amateurish and juvenile, and the whole thing escalated into a real, widely covered debate about sexism, the male gaze, and where exaggerated anime-style character designs fit in modern gaming. So, by the end of the PS3 era, here's where things stood. Sony's public identity had shifted hard towards cinematic, global, prestige blockbusters. Niche Japanese fanservice hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer the platform's headline story. And the debate around fanservice was already heating up, leading to another PlayStation platform quietly becoming the true refuge for niche fanservice games. Of every console in this video, this is the one that stings the most to talk about. The VITA. Commercially, was a disaster for Sony. Gorgeous hardware, way ahead of its time, and it never found the mainstream audience it needed. But here's the strange, bittersweet twist. Because Sony's own first-party support quietly dried up, the VITA became something almost nobody planned for. Japanese, niche, and indie publishers treated it as a blank canvas. Nobody big was watching it closely anymore, so they just made whatever they wanted. This is where import culture became the entire point. The VITA was region-free by design, small and portable enough to travel with, and increasingly, the only place some of these types of games would ever exist.
PlayStation VITA.
PlayStation Vita.
PlayStation Vita is the future of handheld gaming.
Newest Sony PlayStation Portable.
The new PlayStation Vita is out.
The flagship of this entire era is Senran Kagura Shinobi Versus. This is the game that properly introduced Senran Kagura, and by extension, this whole style of fanservice, to a Western audience. And look at this gap. Japan got it in February 2013, but North America and Europe didn't get an official release until October 2014. That's a year and a half where the only way in was importing, or waiting, and hoping. When Exceed finally brought it over, they leaned all the way in with a special Let's Get Physical edition, with an art book, a soundtrack disc, the whole deal. And yeah, it's awesome. Then there's Criminal Girls, invite only, the Vita version of the game we already met back on the PSP. When this one finally reached the West in 2015, the localized release trimmed audio and visuals from the original's motivation sequences. It's a small case on its own, but hold that thought. Monster Monpiece, a Monster Girl card battler developed by Compile Heart, where leveling up your cards involved literally rubbing the Vita's touchscreen to peel away their clothing. When it was localized in 2014, about 40 of the game's 350 card images were edited down specifically to secure a mature rating. Years later, a fully uncensored version of the game got a Steam release. Read into that what you will. In 2014, Bullet Girls released. It's an all-female military shooter that never got an official Western release at all. If you wanted this one, you had to rely entirely on the import scene. And then finally, Valkyrie Drive Bikuni, released in Japan in December 2015, and localized for the West in 2016 by P-Cube. This one's interesting because its Western publisher made a specific public promise before its release, that this game would come over completely uncensored, content fully intact. Valkyrie Drive Bikuni came west exactly the same as the Japanese version. And while we didn't know it at the time, it turned out to be one of the last times that would happen. Import culture, fan translation communities, and now legendary, absurdly expensive physical collector's editions all came out of this strange, commercially struggling little handheld. The Vita gave niche fanservice games a home, and it was also, in hindsight, the calm before the storm. The PS4 launched in 2013 and became the best-selling console of its generation. And somewhere in the years that followed, Sony's own internal decision-making completely shifted. Content approval that used to sit closer to Sony Japan increasingly ran through Sony Interactive Entertainment's Western arms. And starting around 2017, those Western teams began actively blocking, delaying, and altering exactly the kind of content that had defined PlayStation for 2 straight decades. This was when the pot of water began to fully boil. One of the clearest and most infamous cases of this new reality was Omega Labyrinth Z. It was released in Japan in July 2017 for PS4 and Vita without issue. Publisher P-Cube announced a Western localization that November, and then in June 2018, after already clearing the ESRB with a mature rating, Sony simply refused to allow the game onto PlayStation platforms in the West at all. P-Cube's own statement said they had to respect the wishes of the platform holder. There was no public explanation from Sony, they just said no. Keep in mind, this wasn't the ESRB or PEGI drawing a line. Those systems had already done their job. This was Sony overriding the rating board entirely, which meant going forward, getting an official age rating didn't guarantee you anything on PlayStation anymore. Then it happened again. Senran Kagura Burst Renewal was set for a fall 2018 release on PS4 and Steam simultaneously. Apparently, Sony had requested the removal of the game's interactive intimacy mode from the PS4 version. The exact same intimacy mode had already shipped uncensored on PS4 in 2017's Senran Kagura Peach Beach Splash. This sudden, knee-jerk inconsistency left developers and publishers scratching their heads. Xseed's own localization producer confirmed on record that this was, in his words, simply a brand new policy, meaning the rules had changed mid-franchise on the same console for content that had already been approved before. This wasn't just hitting niche anime games either. In 2019, Capcom's Devil May Cry 5 a major mainstream M-rated global release shipped on Western PS4 with a deliberate lens flare effect covering a brief nudity scene, despite the exact same scene appearing uncensored on PC and Xbox One at launch. Capcom actually patched the lens flare out for North America a few weeks later, but still remains in the European version, showing just how chaotic this policy actually was at the time. And that's not to mention the pure distilled absurdity of what happened with Schoolgirl Zombie Hunter. This one didn't get banned or even edited. The PS4 system itself started auto-censoring the words schoolgirl whenever players tried to share a screenshot using the console's built-in share feature, blanking it out like some sort of slur or something. The literal title of a game Sony was actively selling in its own store was being flagged by Sony's own hardware. And the pattern kept going. Kandagawa Jet Girls and later entries in the Oni-chanbara franchise kept getting their content trimmed down for Western PS4 releases compared to their Japanese versions. And by the time Samurai Maiden arrived, a game built and marketed around exactly this kind of appeal, it launched noticeably lighter on fanservice than its own promotional material suggested, a sign that publishers had started quietly self-censoring in advance, just to avoid the fight altogether. Not even long-standing franchises were left untouched. Dead or Alive Extreme 3, Fortune's PS4 version, shared its DLC outfits with the already censored Scarlet re-release, while the very same content on Nintendo Switch stayed uncensored. The list of examples is almost endless. Kenichiro Takaki, the producer behind Senran Kagura, left Marvelous in March 2019 after 13 years, citing exactly this wave of content restrictions as his reason. Sony Japan's own president at the time, Atsushi Morita, would later frame the shift publicly as simply matching global standards to protect younger players.
Sure, Jan.
But global standards applied this inconsistently, banning one M-rated game outright while patching lens flares in and out of another depending on which specific region you lived in, didn't feel like a coherent policy at all. It felt like the platform was pulling the rug out from under a community it had spent 20 years encouraging. By the end of the PS4 era, the message to publishers was unmistakable. Steam wasn't a backup option anymore. For a lot of this content, it was becoming the only reliable option, and that single shift from PlayStation is where this content lives to PlayStation is where this content gets mangled or worse was the single biggest turning point. But before we get to where PlayStation stands today, there's one strange, awkward detour we have to take first. In 2016, Sony launched PlayStation VR, and for about 5 minutes, it looked like this might be a whole new frontier for experimentation, new ideas, hell, maybe this could be the new home for fanservice. Yeah, PSVR turned out to be less new home for niche experimentation, and a lot more extremely expensive, extremely lame tech demos.
But it didn't really justify why you'd spend even $400 to do the PlayStation VR, like get that.
Unlike the PSP or the Vita, small studios weren't flocking here to build entire franchises. Almost nothing on this platform is a full standalone game. It's mostly bonus VR modes bolted onto games that already existed elsewhere. But there were 2 solid entries released right at launch, in 2016, and both are honestly pretty nuts. First, Summer Lesson from Bandai Namco's Tekken team, produced by Katsuhiro Harada, launched in Japan the exact same day as the PSVR hardware itself. Here you play as a private tutor, teaching your student over the course of 7 days.
7 days? Can he do that?
It was originally meant to be just a tech demo, but Bandai Namco liked the reaction so much, they turned it into a full commercial release. It never came to the West, and Bandai Namco's official reason, and I'm quoting this directly, are cultural differences. And then there's Dead or Alive Extreme 3's PSVR mode, nicknamed VR Paradise. This is Team Ninja taking a game already built entirely around leering at beach volleyball players and asking, what if the camera was your eyeballs?
That's a good idea.
It's simultaneously the most advanced use of the PSVR hardware, and also somehow the most unserious thing anyone made for it. It never got an official Western release either. Only a delayed add-on for the English subtitled Asian version, months after Japan already had it. A handful of other games dipped their toe into the VR pool too, like Zone of the Enders, The Second Runner Mars, Mega Dimension Neptunia V2R, and Senran Kagura Peach Beach Splash Sunshine Edition all have some VR modes tacked onto their otherwise non-VR games. But none of it built toward anything. There was no PSVR equivalent of a full Senran Kagura or Criminal Girls, and definitely no wave of studios treating the headset as their new home. And then, in 2023, Sony released the PSVR 2, and
that's all I have to say about that.
Whatever appetite existed for this kind of experimentation on VR hardware never carried forward to the second generation at all. So, unlike the PSP and the Vita, PSVR never became a home for this culture. It was a strange, brief, and slightly nauseating little detour. And while all of this was happening, the console that actually matters for where we end up was already telling us exactly where this story was heading. When the PS5 launched in 2020, this entire story looked like it might just be over. The PS4 era crackdown hadn't reversed. If anything, the message to niche publishers had become crystal clear. PlayStation is a place you negotiate with now, not a place you can count on. And a lot of studios stopped negotiating altogether. The clearest single proof of that is Galgun Returns in 2021. Every prior game in the franchise, the original Galgun, Double Piece, Galgun 2, had released on PlayStation hardware, going all the way back to the PS3. Galgun Returns skipped PlayStation entirely, launching only on Switch and PC. One outlet covering the announcement put it bluntly at the time, saying PlayStation was being left out, presumably because of Sony's own inconsistent content policies. The publisher P-Cube, who years earlier had said getting Sony's approval for this kind of content used to be easy. Like your mom. By 2021, they didn't even bother asking. Steam, meanwhile, had become the default home for exactly this type of game. You didn't have to worry about a ratings board or negotiate with a platform holder. There weren't delays because of patches, and you didn't have to put lens flares to cover up content. For a huge chunk of this community, PC simply became the only place it reliably existed anymore.
This place is dangerous.
And then, something happened that nobody, including myself, fully saw coming. Stellar Blade, developed by the Korean studio Shift Up, released in April 2024. And published directly by Sony Interactive Entertainment as a PS5 exclusive. Its protagonist, Eve, was pure eye candy, the type of character design that Sony's own policies had spent years pushing off the platform. It launched to strong reviews, sold roughly 1 million copies in its first 2 months, and became the best-selling game in the US the month it released. When it later came to PC in 2025, it sold over 1 million copies in just 3 days, and became just the second Sony-published game ever to cross 100,000 concurrent Steam players. As of early 2026, combined sales across both platforms had passed 6 million copies. And now, a standalone sequel, Stellar Blade BloodRayne, is already in development. To be crystal clear, this wasn't a third-party publisher fighting Sony for approval. This was Sony's own publishing label choosing to bet on exactly the kind of content it had spent the previous console generation blocking, delaying, and censoring. This is about as close to Whiplash as it gets. And Stellar Blade wasn't an isolated fluke. Nexon's free-to-play looter shooter, The First Descendant from 2024, leaned all the way into stylized, revealing character designs as a core part of its identity from day one. And after sustained community demand, actually added jiggle physics as a post-launch feature, followed by a swimsuit-themed Hot Springs content update. It's messy, divisive, and had real ups and downs commercially, but it's proof this kind of design is being built into major, multi-platform, mainstream titles again, openly, and without the same instinct to hide it. Chinese and Korean developers have been driving a lot of this momentum industry-wide, with stylish, attractive protagonists leading big-budget action games like Wuchang Fallen Feathers, which found real commercial success on PS5 as part of the broader Souls-like with a hot female lead trend that Stellar Blade helped kick off.
Lamp bearer.
Even Western developers have jumped back in, sometimes very deliberately. Lords of the Fallen 2's CEO publicly confirmed in late 2025 that the game will feature, in his words, attractive female characters in revealing outfits, explicitly framing it as a rejection of what he called overly cautious, politically correct design. The fact that a major Western studio CEO felt comfortable saying this publicly in 2025 tells you the cultural temperature has shifted a long way from the PS4 era. And through all of this, some staples never actually stopped. Gust's Atelier series just kept doing what it's always done. Anime-style RPGs, steady niche audiences, quietly continuing on PS5, exactly as it had since the PS2 era. Not every corner of this culture needed a dramatic comeback. Some of it never left. Now, there's one more piece of the puzzle, and it's still unfolding as I'm making this video. In July 2026, Sony announced it will stop producing physical game discs entirely starting in January 2028. Every new PlayStation release after that point sells exclusively through the PlayStation Store. Think about what that actually means for everything we've been talking about. This entire story started because niche, strange, experimental games could sit on a store shelf next to Tomb Raider. Imports worked because a disc doesn't need anyone's permission once it's manufactured. Fan translation communities worked because physical Japanese copies could travel. That entire chaotic, accidental ecosystem depended on control and creativity being democratized. Once that transition finishes, there's no equivalent of it just showed up on the shelves. Every single release, forever, goes through Sony's approval, on Sony's terms, with no alternative distribution path. That could mean this modern, more open era just keeps expanding, with Sony continuing to actively publish and champion this content the way it did with Stellar Blade. Or it could mean the next time Sony's policies shift, there's no workaround left whatsoever. No import scene, no gray market disc, nothing. We genuinely don't know which future we're headed towards, but it's the single biggest open question hanging over everything. The water has been boiling for years now, but throughout all of this, one thing's clear.
Life, finds a way.
The final chapter for fanservice games on PlayStation hasn't been written yet. After everything that's happened over the last 30 years, that might be the biggest lesson of all. I want to thank you so much for watching to the end. What is your favorite fanservice game on PlayStation? And where do you think it's going next? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for the best niche, indie, and fanservice games. And I'll see you in the next one.